Yeah, hi Pam.
Hi, good evening, Philip.
We are the Enneagram Germany podcast, and usually we speak in German, but this time we have a guest from America, and his name is Peter O'Hanrahan. Did I pronounce that right, Peter?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and today we're going to talk with Peter about the subtypes, the Enneagram subtypes, which is three instincts that we all have that is very part of human nature. And we're going to talk about the embodied Enneagram, which is something that Peter is a real master. And we're going to mention somatic patterns and biological drives and breath work and a lot of interesting things of how to transform and how to use the body for transformational development. I'm very glad that you're here. And since I don't know you that well, I will just switch to Pamela so she can introduce you a bit better.
Yeah. So, hi, Peter. It's really nice to see you here on our podcast. And I thank you for taking time. Thank you you were so willing, when I asked you. And I'm just so happy and quite honestly, quite proud that you would consider it worth your time to come and be on our podcast.
Well, yeah, of course I do. I mean, we're Enneagram people.
We're
in whatever
the
country.
Enneagram people.
Yeah.
And I have known you for a long time, really from the very beginning. It feels like in the days when I still felt like, sort of fighting for this, bringing the Enneagram into the world with so few people knowing what it is even. But you were sort of quite established in California. You were next to Peter and Helen. You were always there as one of the main teachers. You're an associate of the Enneagram Professional Training Program. And for me, really from the beginning, you were the subtype man and the body man. That's just how I've always thought of you. Yeah. And as I have asked you several times here and there, I've been to conferences in Europe and in America where I've, been to your workshops and valued the work, valued what I've learned from you. And I just think it's going to be very interesting to hear what you have to say about subtypes and the embodied Enneagram. So, that would be my very first question. Why Enneagram, Peter? What brought you onto this crazy field where we all had to start at the beginning and, get it known to people? It wasn't exactly an easy journey at the beginning. What brought you to the Enneagram?
Well, I was in Berkeley, California in the 1970s and had moved there really to study holistic health and body therapies and transpersonal psychology and a lot of the stuff that was, kind of being explored in Northern California at the time. And of course, being in Berkeley, I ran into Helen Palmer, who was a guide for us, teacher of meditation and intuitive, was someone important in our community, our whole kind of holistic community at the time.
So Helen was already quite well known in the sort of late 70s in California?
Yeah, she was well known, right. And she had been teaching psychology at one of the local graduate schools.
Yeah.
John F. Kennedy Graduate School at the time. It's gone now. But so I had that advantage. And so in 1978, Helen called the house where I lived with a number of people, including people who had been part of her trainings in meditation and intuition and so on. And she said, look, there's a class happening. You should go. And we had no idea. I mean, just because Helen said, it's like if Helen says, we're going to check it out.
There's a class happening.
And it was the first public Enneagram class taught by Dr. Kathleen Spieth, who was Claudia Naranjo's partner, professionally and personally.
Yeah.
And she was saying, okay, I'm going to take this to the public now. Yeah.
So you actively know the Enneagram since 45 years now?
Yes.
That's not even as old as I am. Like I'm 37. That's crazy.
Yeah. I hear all these interesting teachings that you were learning in California. Why did you focus so much on the Enneagram? What hooked you on it?
Well, again, like many people, it grabbed my attention in a very big way. At first, again, we went just because Helen Palmer said go, and it was this strange thing. And, the name was weird, and the symbol was there, and it seemed like kind of this weird California thing. even to a California guide. But when we started seeing panels, so Kathleen Spieth was doing the class in 9 weeks, and every week, one evening, there would be a panel of a particular type. And I thought this was a great way to learn psychology. How interesting. And then it came to my type. And that was a revelation. I fell out of my chair, you know what I mean? And so I was like, wow, these people are talking about the way that I see the world and the problems that they have or the problems that I have and the strengths. And I mean, amazing.
How do all these people know so much about me?
Right.
Sorry.
Can we know which type you are? Just for
yes, type 8.
Type 8. Okay.
Yeah, that came later in the class. So I was like, okay, no big deal. Everything's interesting. And then, type 8 showed up. So
yeah. So, and from panels, from learning about your type, at some point there came this really tremendous enthusiasm for subtypes.
Well, yeah, because that was so much a part of it. I mean, subtypes, it sounds a little bit, I don't know how it is in German, but in English, it sounds like it's kind of like a subcategory. If you're really interested in the Enneagram, maybe someday you'll learn about these other, Actually, that's misleading because it's so much part, it's like very, very basic to understanding of the Enneagram is to understand the variations. We could say the instinctual variations, which we also call subtypes. And so this came right after. I mean, this might have been, I don't know, maybe the third class. I mean, we jumped in a big way. There were panel classes 3 times a year. There were workshops. And then shortly thereafter, Helen Palmer started teaching, and she was doing panel classes. And so there were hundreds of people every week from mostly the transpersonal psychology community and holistic health people. And I was very involved in holistic health, holistic psychology. I was a body therapist, a counselor. I had a holistic center in Berkeley, which we then had the Enneagram classes there. But what's my point? Here was another holistic system, right? And I think everybody understands this now. Talking about how people are formed, not just in the mind, but also in the heart and in the body, and that there are these 3 distinct centers of intelligence and perception, all working together, of course, but with somewhat distinct functions. And so it was very attractive. The Enneagram was attractive to me right from the beginning because it also is a holistic system, and the body and the heart are very much part of our type structure.
So how do you, with your experience in 45 years on the Enneagram and with everything that you learned about subtypes, today, what is your view today on the subtypes? How would you describe them, and why would you say today it is relevant for us to learn about them?
Yeah. Well, there's different layers of response here. I mean, maybe the first response is, well, because it shows us the variation in the Enneagram types, right? Because the behavior and the orientation, it's like subtypes represent in some way our most important projects in life. Like if I ask people, what's your project? Which is not an easy question to answer sometimes, but you know what I mean? Something about what gives our life meaning. The relationships, the places, the work, the projects that we invest our life force in that are most important to us. And these have a lot to do with our instinctual subtype. And there's a way to open up the view of that and the exploration of what gives our lives meaning and value through understanding the 27 subtype profiles, right? Not character structures. That's the Enneagram types, right? That's, but in terms of profiles, and to talk about those profiles, not that everybody fits into that exactly, not at all, but there's something there about the how the archetypes meet up with our instinctual selves. Our we're of the planet, we're of the earth, and we're also of spirit, and those two combine when we look at the 9 aspects of human spirit and character structures that come with the Enneagram, and then the 3 very powerful biological drives. We say three instincts, but they're also biological drives. And so much of our life is lived from instinct and emotion. And we like to think of ourselves as rational people. We're like thinking and making decisions from our mind, but actually much of life is lived from the heart and the body. And so why not, understand what's going on?
And I think it was so interesting for me to understand how different subtypes relate with each other in relationship, how strongly that is influenced by our subtype. Say a little bit about that.
That's true. Yeah. And, sometimes we say, we don't know 100% about this, but, people will say, well, maybe in long-term intimate relationships, partner relationships, subtypes could be as important or sometimes even more important than the Enneagram type itself. Because of, our style, there's our style. We joke about this, but there's some truth in it. We say self-preservation subtypes have a warm quality about them, warm, nurturing quality, or not, because it can go the other way. The socials, we tend to be more cool because we're kind of socially organized, and hello, how are you? And how do we interconnect? And then, of course, the one-to-one subtypes, the sexual subtypes, are hot, right? Because they're so intense. Except when they're not. Again, it can go in both directions. So there's a general saying, we say warm, cool, and hot. And that alone is fun to explore.
Warm, cool, and hot.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I just heard that the first time.
Can you, you mentioned in the first layer, you mentioned what is your project? And you linked it with the subtypes. Can you please elaborate on that? What do you mean with project? And can you give an example?
Well, let's put it this way. When I get together with the other eights, in workshops and other places, we understand each other, right? Because we can talk about enthusiasm and excess and fairness and anger and, and we really understand what it means to be a type 8. That's our basic character structure. Runs much more deeply than personality, of course. Personality is just kind of our code word in a way. We're talking about character structures. However, where we go in the world with our eightness, the eights being, that's the structure in which we live and express ourselves. Where we go in the world depends more on our subtype, meaning the primary instinct. We go in different directions. I'm talking to my 8 friends, like, really, that's important to you? That's not important to me. Again, there are different territories in the world that are connected with these 3 powerful instinctual drives. And our interests and what draws our attention and what becomes important to us generally has to do with the primary instinctual drive, also known as the subtype, right? I'm a social subtype. My eightness, my energy goes into the social arena, the social territory. The belonging, the membership and participation in groups, and organized groups, not just friendship groups or having people over for dinner, but structured groups, and the society, and the urban areas, and the country, and the world, and to be able to find my place in that and participate in that, which I do through being an 8. But my other 8 friends said, "Oh, I don't care about that stuff, really. I just want to have my main partner there, and I want to work on my own development and my spiritual path." And, it's like it goes in a different direction depending on the subtype. Self-preservation, it's home and family and often business and financial security. And, sure, they can participate in the social structures, but it's just not their main area of interest. Am I making sense?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I found it interesting when I really sort of got into subtypes. I think I really got into it with this message from Helen in my ear. If you really want to know which subtype is your subtype, your main subtype, find the fear. Find the fear. So stop doing whatever behavior is, first of all, one-to-one, then stop social behavior, and then stop the self-pres behavior, and find out which one where there's more fear underneath. Is that something that you relate to at all, or is this just a Helen thing because she is a 6 after all?
Well, both. Of course, she's talking about fear because she was a 6. And we add that she was very powerful and courageous.
Yeah,
6.
absolutely.
But But what her point was that she was big on this combination of psychology and spirituality. And she talked about in the heart center, the importance of the heart center and making the conversion from the passion, which I'm now calling the emotional habit, converting that to the virtue, the capacity of the open heart, how to make that conversion in the heart center. And so her point was, it took me, I don't know, 10, 20 years to really understand this. She kept at it, I was a little dense, but it's like one of the aspects of the subtype is that we express our emotional habit or passion, same thing we're talking about, that gets expressed through the activity of the subtype as a way to discharge it and to fix it and get rid of it and to kind of reconcile it and to do something with it. And we're running the passion or the emotional habit through the activity of our subtype. And so if we can kind of pause in our subtype activity, and instead of kind of trying to work it all out here through our activities and behaviors in the environment, if we were able to go inside and come down, in and down, and just be there with it, we would have direct access to the emotional habit of our type, which is so crucial for our work on ourselves.
Absolutely. And, I'm heart-centered, and for me, it was so interesting. I had to understand what is the behavior that I do with this one-to-one subtype behavior. I had to first understand the behavior to know what to stop doing, because I wouldn't have been aware of it otherwise. And to actually know what to stop doing, and then to experiment with stop doing it, which at first you don't quite know what that means because you've just got this total habit running all the time. And to take my energy back and not do anything at all in relationship with one other person, it was scary. I really came into contact. Okay, this is what Helen means. But at the same time, you come into contact with so much energy for transformation. And that was, for me, a huge win. It was a huge developmental field that I came in contact with, which I wouldn't have come in contact with otherwise. And that's when subtype really began to understand how powerful it is. And from there, I came into body work, because you can't quite manage that amount of energy if you don't have some kind of good grounding practice and some kind of bodywork practice. And for us, it's always the heart center. We have the two words, acceptance and loving kindness. Acceptance, well-meaning loving kindness. And we always teach a breathing practice that, it allows you to become relaxed in the heart center and allow the energy to spread through the body. And, when it's about fear, or quite honestly, sometimes when it's about anger, it can be very, very helpful to do this body practice. So for us, it's also linked in some way, the practice with the energy underneath subtype and the body practice for transformation. I don't know if that's helpful for you to move into the embodied Enneagram, but it's kind of my invitation at this moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's an intersection here. Now, I think we're becoming more and more aware as the years progress that the type structures are very closely connected to the basic neurobiological patterns.
Absolutely.
At least I would assert that. I don't know if you would agree, but I would.
Definitely.
Okay, so for many years it was all about the way we saw the world and our point of view, which is true, and the pattern in our heart center, which is also true. But even before the personality forms, little kids, they show up with a certain temperament and a certain spirit about them and a neurobiology. And to really understand the types, I think we have to understand the neurobiology. This became clear to me in my work as a body-based therapist over many years, because I had the Enneagram. I could be looking at people and understanding, there's a pattern here in the neurobiology. It's not just the way they think or the way they feel. It's in the body. It's embodied. And we can actually describe 9 particular neurobiological patterns or somatic profiles. different language, but we can talk about these particular patterns. Again, not that everybody fits entirely, but it's there. The patterns are there, and the Enneagram kind of reveals them to us, and so it allows us to understand why the fixation in the head, why our point of view, and also our feeling center. There's this constant generation and regeneration of a particular pattern that's very closely related to our embodiment and our neurobiology. So we can talk about working with each of the 9 neurobiological patterns, which I think is exciting, and get people interested in working with the body, because, if we want to work on ourselves, particularly if we're interested in deeper aspects of the work or transformational aspects of the work, we have to work with all 3 centers, right? And so, and we can notice now that there are patterns in the body, just as there are patterns in the heart center and in the head center.
I was just going to say, you say patterns in the body. We talk about the neurophysiological build. It's literally our neurophysiological build. It's the networks. It's brain linked. It's heart linked. It's body linked. But it's always about directing the energy. And if the energy gets contracted, and it does in many different ways with our personality and our habits and our patterns, then that's where we have a chance, if we can get in contact with these contractions, if we can contact with where perhaps it's a bit blocked, then we can do some body work to release it. And I think you would agree that this is very different and quite honestly, fairly highly recognizable in the different Enneagram styles, when what is blocked and what helps it to flow. Would you agree?
Yes, and in fact, there are patterns of body armor, Wilhelm Reich's phrase, patterns of body armor that are more closely related to each of the 9 types.
Yeah, most definitely, right? Most definitely.
And as a facilitator or a body therapist, I got to know that, because otherwise I'm trying to work on one thing, and that's not perhaps the major issue or concern for this person who may be a different type.
But it's interesting because we do coaching with all 3 centers, and although we do body work, but we also notice that, for instance, let's take an Enneagram style 4 who control their emotional heart center from the head, the analysis, etc. We call that the body energy in the head. And so we can talk about that. We can point it out in coaching. Look, you're very much in your head center now, and there's a lot of analysis going on there. How about stopping that and grounding yourself and breathing into your heart center and see what happens? Usually some different kind of input comes from the inside if they change centers. So it really is we'd say 3 levels. There's the behavioral level, there's the feeling belief system kind of level, and there's the transformational level, the energy level. Where would you recognize that in your body work? Would you make that difference when you're doing body work? Behavior, feelings?
Well, sure. What you just said, I could totally agree with. It may not be the same language that I would use, which is fine. Because this is what's exciting about Enneagram kind of happening in so many countries around the world. So your language would be different, but I understand what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah. Some of it might be directly translated from German into English. So I might not say that. If I was talking English for 2 weeks nonstop, I might even express myself slightly differently. But yeah, okay. Philip, you wanted to ask a question.
Unfortunately, I my head is running wild, and I have about 1 million questions. So I recognize we don't have that much time. So when I try to incorporate the subtypes and bring it together with the embodied Enneagram or the body work, I've never asked myself the question, and I don't have an answer for that, but maybe you do. Is the different subtypes linked to a certain body area? Meaning, is head, heart, and the body differently, let's say, some have more weight towards a certain subtype? Or would you say head, heart, and body is always linked, no matter if you're self-present, no matter if you're social, no matter if you're sexual subtype?
Right. That's a great question, Philip. I think a lot of people have been interested in that. And I would say the latter. I would say I don't see one of the main centers being particularly linked to a particular subtype. What I would suggest is that in the body center, right, the body center, that there are subcenters, which in some traditions are called the chakras. And that those chakras are energy centers. Actually, I can find 3 of them in my body center. And I know they're there because I can tell that actually in one place, I'm pretty relaxed and open, and in another place, I'm contracted. You know what I mean? It's like there's some independent, So we would say that the first chakra, the base of the pelvis, the first chakra, it's that self-preservation. It's about our basic right to be alive on the planet. Having the material supplies that we need and enough nurture to sustain life. And that's what we could call first chakra. I'm no expert on the chakras, but it's that place in our bodies. There's a connection there. We can actually go there and sense something about that. And that the sexual instinct, or the one-to-one instinct, because it's both, which shows up a little bit further when we're little, like when we're about 1 or 2, and we form that dyad, that first dyad relationship, the relationship of two-ness, because self-preservation is kind of a fusion in early childhood. We're part of our mother's body. There's no separation. Gradually, we separate into an aspect of two-ness, where there's me and you, and this is the one-to-one, and also the sexual instinct that shows up. And this is, of course, in the middle of our bellies, our genitals, and a little bit higher than that. And I think it's associated with that energy center. Again, it's a little subtle. First you got to get to your body center in the first place, right? But then when you get there, you can actually notice these 3 instinctual drives. Right? And they have different places there, but we can sense the instinctual drives. And in fact, if we want to work on ourselves and our subtypes, we have to be able to sense them in our bodies, right? And then the social instinct, which comes a little bit later, when we're age 3, 4, and beyond, it's more in terms of our solar plexus. It's the higher up in our belly center. But whether we can actually notice those 3 subcenters or not, we can learn to notice the presence of those 3 instincts because they feel differently. We have the right to be alive and here on the planet and grounded, and life is good, and I can be here. We've got the one-to-one or sexual, which is that intense connection with another human being, and it's our right to be seen and loved as an individual. Not just part of the family, not just part of the society, but as an individual. And then we've got our social instinct, which is about our membership and belonging. And they're all 3 survival. We're here because we've had all 3 of those in the development of our species. But now it's more than survival. Now it can be something larger than that, generative. But we can learn to sense them, and they're different. There's a different quality there in each of the 3 instincts. And also, just to make an additional point, they're biological drives, meaning drives have an object. They're seeking satisfaction. And so they are engaging us to connect and define whatever that is in our environment. So it's inside of us, but it also takes us into connection into the world.
Do you feel that there is a different quality also for the subtypes when let's say, the ego takes over and you're very much in your Enneagram structure and you're very much led by the passion, which you call the emotional habit, which I find a nice word, by the way. And if you're more receptive and open and you're led more by the virtue, would you say that the subtype more comes through in the passion, like in the typical ego area? And what is the subtype like when you go through the transformational response into the virtue?
That's great. Yeah. No, you're right on track there. And that's a lot of what the work is. You just said it. To be able to access the kind of the right use of our, biological energy, and to be able to do that in combination with a more open heart. When the heart is open, any of these subtypes, when the heart is closed, it's like, look out, it's dangerous. Look at the planet today. That's what it's about. People are acting out all of these instincts, and they're doing it to some degree, to a large degree, through a heart that's shut down. When the heart is opened up, all of the instincts become so life affirming and so cooperative and connecting. It's remarkable. One of the reasons this work is so important.
And it's interesting for me that, so my kind of first, after I began to really take subtypes seriously and really wanted to work with them, that first kind of goal was to get in contact with this energy that Helen was talking about, this fear that she was talking about, energy for transformation. I wanted energy for transformation. That was that's what I was looking for all the time. And, but then I began to realize the perspective that you have, if you're one-to-one, is that you always want to have this intense relationship with one other person, which is a little bit tricky if you've got groups in front of you. The perspective doesn't quite open up to the whole group. It just wants to do lots of single one-to-one relationships. And with 6 people, it's not a problem. But if you've got 18 people sitting there, it becomes quite a big problem.
Very practical.
A source for stress.
Yeah. So we say, okay, so you need a little more social instinct. The good news is we can develop these with practices. You know what I mean? Awareness and practice. We can actually get better. I've learned to be a little more holding the intense gaze of the one-to-one subtype.
Yeah. And to me, that was this kind of real opening. It was another huge learning field. Wow, it's just so different but you have to go through the fear again. It was scary for me to just have the whole group, in my perspective, but not to do the single relationships would have given me safety. To not do them was, first of all, a bit scary until I got used to it, until I had built perhaps enough presence to hold a group.
Yeah. Well, you also shifted your attentional style a little bit, right? You began to see, social instinct has a more circular gaze. You're not locking in on one person so much. You could, but you're moving it around to make sure that everybody's connected, or if someone needs support, or there's inclusion, or people, all that.
So this also makes it, for me, a very important theory for anyone who's going to lead any kind of groups working with people, and that you need to know this about yourself. So you bring some gifts, some can much more easily have individual relationships with single people in the group. But on the other hand, you also have to be aware, do you have the group presence? Or is that your developmental field? Is that something you need to work on to, in the end, be justice and fairness and be a good trainer, So I think that's a very important area where this work should be understood.
Right. When you talk about group leaders, it's so true. We can see their subtype style. Oftentimes, we can see their subtype style before we know their Enneagram type. For me, outside the Enneagram work, it's been fascinating to look at religious leadership as shaped by the predominant subtype. Very interesting to me because it changes the whole feel of the congregation.
Would you like to give us an example? Would you be willing to give us an example?
Well, self-preservation leadership is we're here, we're part of the human family. We're going to take care of everybody because we're all together as part of the human family. And there's this warmth, there's this nurture. Mm-hmm. It has somewhat more of a mothering aspect. Mm-hmm. Even with the guys, there's just a little more of a nurture and warmth that comes through. And an inclusion around we're going to take care of people and we're going to support the families in the congregation. And in the social, we're going to be connected to social institutions and organizations and social causes, and we're going to participate in that and make a difference in the world. And if it's a one-to-one, a charismatic, more charismatic leader, it's like we're just going to open the doors to a connection, union experience with divine energy. And those are three very different styles. And so,
yeah.
So, can you, I think we're all three different subtypes here. I'm self-preservation, I think, or quite sure. Pam is one-on-one, and I think you're social. So also quite interesting. So if I'm someone who wants to develop more a certain subtype or an instinct that might not be my instinctual first choice, what could I do to develop more the attention towards self-pres, one-on-one, and social? What kind of recommendation do you have for that?
There are sets of practices for each of these areas because, again, it's not only inside of us, it's also out here in the world. And so we can practice the expression of each of these three instincts, again, with awareness, with breath. And sometimes it means taking on something new, like if you want to develop your social instinct, join a group, join a club, be part of an organization, deal with what shows up. If anxiety shows up, if boredom shows up, just, kind of work with that, knowing that practices, we have to practice without an expectation of a positive result at first. You know what I mean? That defines a practice. You know what I mean? We just have to keep practicing.
Yeah, I like the definition. Thank you.
Yeah. Self-preservation, it's like in my relationships, I can practice being warmer with people. People tell me I'm like cool or I'm cold. I don't want to, I want to be warm. I want to connect. If I'm working, with myself, I put off my self-preservation instinct for a long time. And then I suddenly had to pay more attention because I got older. I had to have a relationship with a doctor. Imagine. I went a long time without any doctor. Chiropractor and, whatever, dermatologist. But you know what I'm saying? So I had to really make I had to make a project out of it because left to my own devices, I would not go there. I would think, oh, that's a good idea. And then 6 months later, I would realize, I hadn't made that phone call yet. What's going on? One-on-one is like, look, in terms of being with people, I had to practice getting there and making the eye contact beyond my comfort zone, breathing with that, dealing with my anxiety, learning how to run that energy between me and another person. In my marriage, I had to practice one-to-one because we're both socials. You know what I mean? We're great in a social dimension, but the one-to-one, we had to go, wait, let's get together. Let's go out on a date night, just you and me. And then there's also something else that has to do with particular, like a drive towards personal excellence. And that's, and bringing the energy up in one's body. So that's something we can learn about and practice if we choose to.
And you said, I like your thing with what is a practice? It is something that you have no expectation of a good result in the beginning. But
right.
Why would I have to do this practice? When you say eye contact beyond your comfort zone, why should I develop my other instincts further if I'm so comfortable in my leading?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's a judgment call. I'm not. Some people maybe they do fine living life, 60-70% out of one of their instincts. You know what I mean? And just enough to get by in the other instincts. What I would suggest is that if we're interested in our development and our own human potential, we access our full potential by developing all three instincts. Not that they have to be equal. That's we just have to have good enough functioning in each of those areas to support our larger goals in our larger life. And also sometimes to open doors in life that we didn't even know were there.
So you say the potential that we gain for ourselves is the reason why it's so important to develop these other instincts. Do you understand it correctly?
Yeah. And also because if we have blind spots in our instincts, if we don't go to some of those instincts, it shuts off a whole part of life. We don't have that. And sometimes there are problems that show up in that area because we're not paying enough attention. So that could be another reason. It's like if I don't pay enough attention to my self-preservation instinct, my health suffers, or I don't have enough money in my bank account.
And right? This brings me to this. So what's coming out of me the whole time is free will, free will, free will, free will. So if you want to change your perspective from the one-to-one to the social, or from the one-to-one to the self-pres, you need to engage intention, energy, willpower. You need your will, because normally your will is absorbed in the habit and you don't have it at your disposal to make this aware change. So it's really important to understand that your intention and your own will, your own power, is something you do actually have at your disposal. Just we forget it when we're in the habit, but we have to activate it to be able to make that change, very aware of the change in the perspective, and kind of the energy follows. You know, it's our age-old placement of attention, the energy follows. But I think it's so important to be aware that will and willpower, obviously activating the belly center, but it's the key. It's an absolute key to know that you can make these changes if you activate willpower.
And have support.
And have support, yeah. And have experiences to be able to talk to people, you know, have someone else who knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, but, you know, in a very simple way, there are some people, they won't exercise unless they have company. Now, given that, if you need to exercise and you're one of those people, get the company. You know what I mean? Take a class, engage a friend to take a walk. You know, in other words, do what works for you. And I think support is very important for each of us, maybe in different dimensions, but nonetheless.
And that's really nice because it means you're valuing what your main habit is, your main instinct is. You're valuing, you're taking care of it, but you can still then do something kind of, as you say, join a group or get someone to go for exercise with you, whatever, but you can support yourself. That's also a little bit of self-pres in there, how to look after yourself. We're beginning to combine it here.
Yeah. And also to remember that there are some real challenges here. There's some paradox here. Like if I don't want to put Philip on the spot really, but you reminded me of this. If you're a self-preservation 3,
yes,
right? Self-preservation 3s, they're organized towards security. Security is a good word for them, but oftentimes it's financial security. And it comes through working really, really hard over a long period of time. And yet in doing so, you can end up not taking care of your health. And that's anti-self-preservation.
It's true, yeah. Thanks.
So there's the, it's complicated. I find that interesting, but sometimes it's very complicated because you could be self-preservation and also anti-self-preservation. Both.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah. So I know this is going to be a bit of a change in topic, but maybe even not. You mentioned the somatic patterns. I'm very interested in a bit more in what you want to say about this. First of all, just in general, and then maybe you can even go through with us very maybe known for you, very recognizable repeating somatic patterns in maybe centers or also types.
Right. Yeah. So if we look at I'm looking at two things. I'm looking at the neurobiology or the basic temperament, right? And there's been little research here done, but there was one research study that's on DrDavidDaniels.com, DrDavidDaniels.com. David Daniels was, of course, one of our narrative co-founders along with Helen Palmer. And there's an article there about a study that was done a long time ago, maybe in the 70s or sometime. They were actually measuring temperament in infants, that they could continue to quantify regardless of the early childhood environment. Like it was still there, not related to your nurture, your early nurture. What they came up with was that there were 9 temperaments that they could identify and quantify. They didn't know the Enneagram, but again, something about 9ness that helps us organize information. And what I can see is that there are 9 temperaments and neurobiological patterns with different flavors. Body type makes a difference. If you're, big and muscular, or if you're slender and high, there are other elements, but there are these patterns. And that affects the way that we meet the challenges of life in terms of where we accrue our defenses, our body armor, our breathing pattern is interrupted, and so on. And so, so there's ways to talk about this. And there are groups of 3. There's 9. I'll use one example that has been really, really important for me, which is understanding 6s. We've got these like the cautious 6s and the phobic 6s, you know what I mean? And then we've got like the counterphobic 6s, the assertive and sometimes aggressive 6s. And it's like, how are these people in the same Enneagram type? Well, because their neurobiology is that their alarm system is the most sensitive, the most easily triggered of all the type structures. And what happens is that alarm system gets triggered because they can see danger approaching from way far out there, in ways that I can't. They're just, and what happens is that then they react or respond either in fight, flight, or freeze. And there you have the variety. You've got the really strong, kind of assertive, fight, meet the challenge. And then you've got the withdrawing 6s who are, you understand what I'm saying. That's, to me, key for understanding type 6. How do we understand 6s if we don't understand the neurobiology, right? And have that alarm system, which had such wonderful survival value for the species, the individual, but also the family and the tribe over a zillion years. But now in a modern world, where there's so much going on all the time, it gets triggered a lot of the time. And it has a hard time to reset back to the 0 point. So how can you say to us type 6, don't worry, or don't, if 6s don't learn how to get back to kind of like, the 0 point, meaning more relaxed in their body, how can they possibly, have access to their full potential as human beings? They're just in the alarm reaction all the time. So that to me is, and of course, all the types have a particular neurobiology. Type 2, right? I'm looking at my friend Pamela, it was maybe 20, 25 years ago, the Italians, scientists were doing experiments with monkeys, and kind of their brain waves and so on, not with inserts, but, with those kind of pads you put over the heads. And they realized that there was a monkey that was reacting. They could see it on the scope as though they were drinking a cup of water because one of the scientists across the room was drinking a cup of water. Maybe you've heard of this. And they realized, oh, there's such a thing called mirror neurons. You know what I mean? Where that respond and internalize the experience of somebody else, their physical or emotional experience. And we're mammals, we're human beings. And so we respond to what's happening in another person. Type 2s are born with more mirror neurons. They just are born with that, And of course, then that gets put to work and so on. And then now you have a type structure and all that. But, so for 2s, it's like you got so many mirror neurons that empathy is not only easy, it can be dangerous because you can over internalize other people's experience.
Yeah. Well, let's say that you definitely need the body center. If you're going to be a 2 in this world, it's really a good idea to activate the body center.
Right. And your body, your experience, not somebody else's body.
Absolutely.
Now you, unfortunately, you really piqued my curiosity. So is this with the mirror neurons? Is this an example also for all heart types, or is it different for the 3s and the 4s? And also to be honest, if it's possible to go through the other types as well?
Sure, I can do that quickly. Heart types in general have more access to those mirror neurons. It's just that the 2s really stand out. The 3s it can certainly read people and read situations. You know, they've got the emotional intelligence that goes in that direction, right? Like being able to read a room and know what's expected in order to meet those expectations. So 2s, 3s, and 4s, yeah, they've got more mirror neurons in general. But for 3s, we would say there's 2 things we could say about 3s. One, they have a lot of kinetic energy, moving energy. They want to move. They want to be active. They want to move. Sitting still is very hard for them, right? So they want to move. And 2, they are very sensitive to the expectations of others. They know them immediately. It happens. They don't even have to think about it. So it's kind of like the 2s, it's like other people's needs and feelings. 3s, it's like other people's expectations. They respond. It's like, I got the energy. I can do that. You know, so that's the combination that we can see in practically every 3. That's their neurobiology. And there's other aspects too, again, depending on the body type and so on. But that supports the whole 3-type structure. You got the energy for it. You want to make it happen. Let's go. Let's do it. And I'm also tuning into what other people expect. It's inherent. I don't know how to do that. I mean, I'm working at it, but you know what I mean? I don't. And the 4s, it's like being connected with people, but then the mood, the changeability of mood, the intensity of emotion and the changeability of mood, right? And so, you know, if we wanted to go towards the, you know, literature of psychology, right? I'm apologizing now for the language, just saying that 4s, they're on what we call the hysteric schizoid swing, right? 2s, 3s, and 4s, it's all basic hysteric, meaning that energy collects in the chest and then spills out into the environment. And of course, the big challenge for the feeling types is to get grounded. So it's, you know, just spilling out in different ways, right? 2s making connections, 3s getting things done that are successful in the eyes of others, and 4s, you know, emoting and connecting through meaning and value and purpose. But 4s can be out there and connect, and then they're drawn back in. Right. So we say they can withdraw when there are problems for 4s. They withdraw to the core, and they withdraw energy from the face and the hands and the feet, and everything gets concentrated here. And then they have a tendency towards melancholy and depression. And you can map this in terms of the energy and the biology of it. 5s. You know, and this is very useful to understand about 5s, they have the most sensitive nervous system. We don't know that about them because they can look pretty shut down or detached or up in their heads, but that's just their defense to get away from the fear of overwhelm and intrusion because the nervous system is so darn sensitive. And they may not know how to protect that. We may not know how to honor that and respect that. And so there's this constant too much intrusion, too much coming in, and so they leave, they go up into their heads. But it's really based on that highly, highly sensitive nervous system. And, you know, what they eat and the clothes they wear and the sounds and the other people, I mean, all of that, they have a lot to deal with, you know. I mean, I'm like a bull in a china shop compared to a 5. The 6s I mentioned, and the 7s, which are kind of a new character structure in a way. Although they've been around, they pop up whenever there's periods of wealth and affluence, you know, the Renaissance in Italy and southern France, for example, and Northern California currently. It's not so much about the armoring of the body, the tension in the body and the contracted muscles. Really, it's about 7s, they go up and out. Up and out. Their capacity for stimulation is enormous. And yet, when they overdo it, big trouble. So the question is discernment. You know what I mean? Any quality of the type, when overdone, obviously leads to problems. With the 7s, neurobiologically, they're available for lots and lots of stimulation. It's kind of the opposite of the 5, right? And hence they're too muchness. And right next to 8, with 8 has a neurobiology. There's a kind of a buildup of energy in the body-based energy that seeks expression, and more is better. And so, you want to do full on, full out, and then sometimes you crash and burn and rest and you take it up again. But it's like this big energy that comes forward. And by the way, some types, 3s, 7s, and 8s, take a lot of breath into the chest. And because we like the energy. And so breathing into the chest gives us more energy, and that's better because more is better. And then, it's like, so, and that's very different from some of the other types around the Enneagram. So 7s and 8s are close, different type structures, but again, energetically, there's a similarity, like more. And the 9s, they have this quality of being able to self-soothe, right? They can self-soothe. And 9s have a very interesting, I joke when I was a young body therapist, I had clients that would come in and I tell them to breathe deeply and we'd do some work, and I won't get into all that, but they're lying there and I'm working with them and they take some deep breaths and they'd fall asleep. What is going on? Yeah. This is nuts. I knew something was wrong. You know what I mean? I wasn't earning my pay, And then I realized over time, when 9s breathe deeply, they breathe into the belly. And that's the calming breath. And they can do that. But don't breathe into the chest, because that might bring up discomfort and feelings and stuff. Anyway, so 9s have a basic orientation. Their neurobiology easily goes towards relaxation, self-soothing, and, comfort. It's in their bodies. And 1s are just have this innate sense of how things can fit together in the right way. They 1s know in their bodies when things are out of place. And then they go up in their head and they analyze and they criticize, but it starts they're in the body. They can sense it in the body. The best way to put things together in an organized fashion. And God bless the 1s. Where would we be without the 1s? Kind of getting things organized. So anyway, that's the quick.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's so interesting, Peter. And I'm hearing these different kind of perspectives on, and I'm sort of trying to bring it together with what we teach, how we teach, obviously, all the time. I'm sure you'll be happy to hear that we teach the 8s are highly emotional people. We really emphasize that from the beginning, every time, to allow them to be who they really are and to say this is normal.
Well, I'm not sure I agree, but I think it's best to err on the side of 8s are emotional.
And then you get them saying, I don't think anyone else would agree with that. And then we've got the conversation.
Then you've got the conversation.
Right? So you just mentioned with a 9, the breath in the belly and that it's calming. I'm very interested in that because we also, like Pamela said, we always say, breathe with acceptance and loving kindness. And we realize, and also there's actually been a lot of studies supporting that if you relax the heart in a sense that it's okay the way it is, don't need to stress about it, then there are also the possibility to calm you down. Maybe not the way to go to sleep, but rather calming you down emotionally, that you're not that overstimulated. And like you said, it spills out with the example with the heart types. So how would you agree with this? And how would you incorporate the breath in the heart and the belly to calm you down as well?
Well, I think that's a very good practice, what you just described. And what I think is important is to understand that there are 2 ways to approach practice. One is active practice and one is receptive practice. We have in the narrative work and in our trainings, we do mostly we work with the breath on the receptive side, meaning bring your attention in and follow your breath. Follow. See if you can relax or how much you can relax, but follow the breath. Basic meditation technique, from Vipassana and so on. But But there's also active breathing practice. And the good news about that is that we can actually change our physiology on the spot with awareness and active breathing practice. And so, but there are different directions that we go with active breathing practice. So if you need more energy in your body, you breathe into the chest. Sometimes just do that naturally, but a lot of people, they don't know that. You know, they're not used to breathing much into their chest. So if you need more energy, breathe into your chest. And it changes in the moment. And over time, perhaps there's some gradual change in capacity, right? Sometimes it's like breathing into the belly is the calming breath. So we have the energizing breath in the chest and the calming breath in the belly. And then there's also a particular counter-anxiety breath pattern, which is really, really helpful. I mean, anxiety is not a fun thing. And so there's a specific counter-anxiety breath. I'll just give you a very short version because I don't want to hold it out. But you take a big breath into the diaphragm, that big rubber band. So it's that sheet of muscle right through the middle of your body. You expand that on the inhale, and then you let the exhale out through your pursed lips. And as you hold it here, like the end of a balloon, you try to let all this go. In other words, you're not using your diaphragm to exhale. You relax, you try to let go of the diaphragm. So you expand the diaphragm on the inhale. That's like 2, 3, 4. And then you exhale slowly, or you allow the exhale slowly, and you hold it back for a count of 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, a simple way to say that is anytime your exhale is longer than your inhale, that's going to help. But this stretching of the diaphragm with the inhale, and then holding it kind of stretched for a bit, and then letting it go, 4, 5, and 6, that changes your physiology. It's not going to change the issues, you know, but wow, is that ever a good help when you're in the middle of an anxiety situation?
Thanks.
So we would say if you have an emotional reaction in your body, first give your attention to the emotional reaction, give it room, give it space, want to have it, give it more space in your body. So breathe in a way to give it more space in your body, and then do the breathing practice with acceptance and loving kindness. And I like the way you say it changes your physiology. My words would be it changes the quality of the energy, so you can actually feel the transformation. You can feel the frequencies. Our body is a transformer. It changes frequency within the body. Is that conform with what you're saying? It changes physiology?
Yeah, I just think you've developed further in a particular line of work here. Maybe I'm more of a generalist. And so I would say that there are times, I think, when it's okay to actually change what's happening in our bodies and change our, like, reactivity. I mean, as an 8, if I didn't know how to use calming breath, my reactivity would be all over the place. You know how we say to 8s, it's like, well, when you get really angry, take 10 deep breaths, right? Sometimes it takes 20 or 30 with the 8s, but you know what I mean? It's like I can reduce the amount of anger and activation in my system by using the breath. And then there are other times when I would much prefer to do exactly what you described, which is kind of allow it to be there, not try to change it, and just kind of give it some room. Both are important, I think.
So, what I think it's so nice to hear is your confirmation with all the information that we have about the neurophysiology. We still need practice, and we need practice for the 3 centers, and we need a choice of practice. One practice is not enough. We need a choice. We need to find out discernment. You need to be able to discern what is good for you now, what is going to be beneficial for you, and which practice serves the kind of intention that you have, which I think can lead to, it can be changing your subtype, your perspective, it can be changing any kind of habit, but it's the diversity of practice also for the 3 centers. so, I love your embodied Enneagram. I think it's so specific for each Enneagram style, and it's so useful for each person to really understand that. So we will be putting your link on our podcast so that if anyone is good in English, if they can, I assume you'd welcome some German speakers on your podcast if they're willing to understand or speak English.
Well, sure. And also there's some articles on my website that go a little further. Like if you want to learn more, like the 4 basic breathing techniques, there's an article. I just said it very quickly.
Yeah, and I can really recommend it. I think it's very, very useful for anyone who wants to work on their own development actively, also with their body centers and with body practice.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I actually still have a million questions. It's the problem is the more you talk, the more I have a question. So it's not getting less. It's a problem, but that's a problem I generally run into in my life. It's very normal for me, but I was worried.
I don't think it's a problem, Philip. I think your move from 3 to 6 is of competence, as I've said many times.
maybe also that, yes. Yeah. I'm very thankful for your time, and I would like to ask if there is anything that you would like to close with. We've talked about subtypes, we've talked about somatic patterns, about the different centers and breathing methods. It was actually quite a rich episode. So is there anything you want to close with?
I would say that it's very heartening to see how the Enneagram continues to show up in so many different places, and how smart and sincere and heartfelt people like yourselves, like us, are attracted to this system, and that it's getting bigger all the time. And, it started out as this little California, Berkeley thing here in the 70s, and we had no idea that it would spread around the world as it has. And through not only the psychological channels, but of course through the Christian churches, Richard Rohr and Andres Siebert and others who were very active in Germany back in the day. And it's just very wonderful to see this happen. And also I would just add that as we go, I think what we're understanding is to be able to be kind to ourselves. It started out as kind of like this kind of severe critical system, and ego was bad and whatever. But I think now we're being able to kind of like celebrate this wonderful human diversity. All the types, all the ways of being in the world are wonderful and necessary, and of course we need to work on it too. So I'm just heartened to know that you're doing your good work in Germany. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. And please give Helen my love. Please give her the fondest greetings and love from Pam. And it's just lovely to know that she's in Berkeley. I've got the picture of her house and her with Chris, and it's just nice memories, fond memories. It's just nice to go there every now and again. And Philip has heard it many times, my gratitude, how lucky I was to just happen to be in a certain place that I happened to come across the Enneagram. So thank you for your time.
And thank you, Peter. So if there's anyone listening who is interested in a seminar about the subtypes, we have we have a seminar in German. It's not in English. It's online. It's hosted by Enneagram Germany, which is Pamela and me. You've heard us just now talking with Peter. And it's going to be in January, and it's going to be from the 18th of January to the 20th, and it's going to be online. So if you have any interest in that, then just go to our website, which is enneagramgermany.de/Subtypen. That's a German word, Subtypen. Yeah, so you learn a bit of German now, Peter.
Okay.
And with that, I just mentioned again, we will leave a link to you as well. We can only highly recommend if anyone wants to do body work even more deeply and do it with the Enneagram always as a base and as a foundation, then Peter is 45 years in the business of the Enneagram, knowing a lot and being very experienced. So you can just follow the link. So thank you, Peter.
Thank you both,
Thank you,
Philip and Pamela.